now we're back. And it's cold again. It's been really cold. I got back last night from a few days away and discovered that my heat isn't working and my plumbing is frozen. I turned the water off, but I didn't turn off the valve that was closest to where the pipe comes in from the street. I turned off the next one and it froze between those two valves. So I've spent a bunch of today figuring out how to fix that. It's always fun to have an excuse to learn some new thing. In this case, that's replacing a section of pipe. I guess I'll go down the list of the different categories of things I said I was working on last time, with the first being the warehouse. One really cool thing happened about a week ago, which is that an article got written about us in a newspaper around here called the Bushwick Daily. And while there was a slight kerfuffle in which they made it sound like we were the ones who were throwing raves in here during COVID, when in fact it was the previous tenants. But overall, it was definitely a good thing. We got probably 500 new Instagram followers in the space of a few days, which doubled the number of followers we have. And while that feels like a vanity metric at some level, it actually does make a difference in what we can do and how many people will show up. So that was pretty sweet. There were also a number of people who reached out to me on Instagram as a result of the article who want to do stuff here, which is awesome. That's what I most want to have happen, is new people to get involved and new things to happen in here. So it sounds like in the next few months, we're going to have an art show, a tattoo event, a guy painting enormous canvases in here a few days a month, all sorts of fun stuff. So I'm really stoked about that. We also got reached out to by a chocolate brand or something. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that, but they said they want to cater THC infused chocolates and drinks at events or something. I don't know. I'll email them back. Maybe something will come of it. It's fun just having all these things start to happen as a result of having a space where people can do whatever they want, basically. Prep for the New Year's show is probably the main priority this week. We already have 65-ish tickets sold pre-sale, which is awesome. We've never had anything close to that before. That comes out to about $1,200 of ticket sales so far, which doesn't even come close to covering our expenses. I can break that down at some point, and I'll maybe do that after it happens so that I know the actual numbers. But it's pretty cool to have sold $1,200 of tickets for an event that we're throwing, and presumably we'll end up with significantly more than that. Today was actually our biggest ticket sales day so far. We sold 10 tickets today, which is great. We also have a whole new sound system. I can't remember if I mentioned that in the last video, but we're all super stoked to get to use it for real. It sounds absurd. Shout out Steven for that one. Before New Year's, there's a lot to do. I just have a bunch of logistical stuff to get done. Sean's gonna paint the whole stage and the background of the stage, and actually paint a black on black pattern on the background of the stage if he has time. Chris is making some more lights and getting the rest of the lights on DMX so that we can control them from a computer. Charlie's finishing setting up all our sound equipment. Just lots of people doing lots of stuff. So that's the workshop. The next thing I talked about last time was Highside Labs, the business that keeps this afloat. And there aren't a ton of major updates there. It's been pretty slow because it's the holiday season. It's kind of how it goes in the consulting world. But we have made some progress on the tool that I mentioned last time that we're trying to build to replace a tool called AMTU that Amazon is deprecating in like 5 days. It definitely is not going to be done in 5 days, but we're making some progress and I'm excited to just see what happens with it. It's fun to have something that has an urgent deadline and has people who want to use it. I put up a blog post with an email newsletter sign up about our AMTU replacement. So if people are searching for it, hopefully they'll find our blog post and put their email in, and then we can email them once the product's ready. I also have my friend Victor onboarding into the company now, which is awesome. But it's really nice to have another person involved who also has more experience than I do, because there's a lot of things I don't know how to deal with. I have a client right now who is having some bugs with a product we finished for them a couple months ago. And one thing that I've always struggled with is figuring out how to bill for bug fixes to a product I already delivered. In the software world, you expect things to break. They always do. And if they break immediately, then clearly there was a bug that you could have found and fixed before you delivered the product. But if they take months to break, probably the issue is something that would have been pretty hard to discover up front. And so it's pretty standard to charge more to fix the thing, even though it's a bug with your original program. And it's always awkward to negotiate that, because often the client thinks, well, you made it and you said it worked and now it doesn't work, so shouldn't you fix it for free? And while that sounds like it might make sense on the surface of it, it makes the economics of running a software consulting business basically impossible, because you'd spend all your time fixing bugs you weren't getting paid to fix. So what Victor has introduced is that we can do a couple things differently to avoid this problem. One is have clear handoffs for projects where we say, at this point, we've done everything we said we were going to, you verified that it all works, and so from here on out, you take ownership of the code, you're responsible for all the fixes, and if anything happens, that's on you. Or you can sign a retainer and we'll be available to fix problems as they arise, and you just pay us a set amount every month, and that covers bug fixes and maintenance. We'll definitely be doing things like that going forward, because this has been a huge headache for me, and I never even thought to imagine what a solution to it would be. I thought it was just an inherent part of this business. In general, the things I really need to do more of for work are write blog posts and publish open source tools, because I know that those will lead to us getting business. I also should probably start doing more on LinkedIn. I hired a friend to get that started for me, but there's a lot more to do. I find it kind of onerous, so I always end up putting it off, but I really should get to that. And then the third thing I talked about last time is fitness. I find it really hard to get enough exercise in New York, because the way I'm used to getting exercise is by taking a hike, and there's no hikes to take in Brooklyn. And so it feels like running is my only real option for getting a lot of exercise in a way that I can do consistently and works in all conditions. I bike some in the summer, but it's really unpleasant biking right now, and I don't want to hit some ice and break my face. So I really want to be able to run, but I haven't been able to run for probably 5 years now. I got a lot of injuries when I was a teenager from thinking I was indestructible and keeping on going even when things hurt a lot. And I one day decided I was going to start running 5 miles a day when I was 19, and you can imagine how that worked out. I destroyed both ankles, and I haven't been able to run since then. I went to a PT for it for a while, but my luck with PT has never been good. I've always had it feel like nothing was happening, and I knew that tons of athletes were getting support from PTs who really were able to fix their injuries and get them back running or doing whatever their sport is again. So I thought that there must be something I was missing, and I realized that it was probably that I was going to rehab PTs for people who were coming out of surgery or stuff like that, and what I really needed was a sports physical therapist who was used to dealing with athletes and those kinds of injuries, and with people who are willing to do pretty much any amount of work to get back to what they were doing before. And there's this community called Uphill Athlete that I found out about through a book I bought about training for mountaineering. It was written by the people who run Uphill Athlete. Uphill Athlete is an online community of coaches and mountain athletes, and while I wouldn't exactly call myself a mountain athlete yet, that is why I want to be in good shape. I want to be able to go into the outdoors in the mountains and do hard things. And there aren't a whole lot of mountains around here, but I intend to make most of my traveling for next year be related to doing things in the mountains, which I didn't do this year. And that's the biggest thing I'm unhappy about with this past year. It was a great year on almost every front, but I spent really, really little time in the mountains, and that made me kind of sad. And in order to stay in good enough shape to be effective in the mountains, I really feel like I need to be able to run. And so I realized that Uphill Athlete must have physical therapists they work with, and I emailed their coaching email, and they hooked me up with one of the physical therapists they work with. He's a physical therapist for athletes who do cross-country skiing in the Olympics and the World Cup, and I had my first meeting with him today, and it just made me so happy to talk to someone whose attitude was basically, if you want to be able to do it, and you're willing to put in the work to be able to do it, we're going to be able to fix this problem, and you're going to be able to run. I've been wanting to run so badly for so long, and it just seemed wrong to me that at 23 I would be irreparably damaged and unable to run, and so I'm just so stoked to have a clear-ish path towards getting there again. If I could run and not get injured all the time, I think I'd be running several times a week. I love doing it, but I just haven't been able to, so I'm super duper stoked about that. The past few months, I've also been able to do quite a bit of climbing without injuring myself. The past few years, because of an old forearm and wrist injury that I got on both arms at once, I hadn't really been able to do any climbing without getting really bad tendonitis. But I finally ramped it up slowly enough, I think, and so I've been able to climb a moderate amount, which for me feels like a lot now since I hadn't really been able to do it at all. And so I'm actually making progress on that as well. And I feel like if I can climb and run, I'll be pretty happy and I'll be able to make progress towards my goals in the mountains. Last thing, a little story time. On the second calendar day of winter, my dad and I went up into the White Mountains in New Hampshire. We were supposed to do it overnight, but the weather looked really bad, and it did end up being really bad. So we just decided to cut out part of the hike and make it a day hike. And then we got to where no one had walked before, and there'd been almost 2 feet of fresh snow the previous week. Then it got hard. At certain spots, we were basically snow climbing because the snow was so deep that on steep slopes, you were just up to your chest in it sometimes. And the next couple miles took a lot longer than the first couple. And then the last mile was really steep, and that was the push to the summit. And it was just a little mountain. It didn't look super intimidating or anything, but we were running kind of late. Everything had taken way longer than we expected because of how deep the snow was. And so we were fighting the dark. And this last mile took us 2 hours. It was a really steep slope, probably pushing 45 degrees, and there were trees everywhere, and the snow was so deep that it basically was like an actual snow climb for a mile. It took us till almost when it got dark to get to the summit, and it was getting cold, and we were worried that it was going to start raining because that was what it was supposed to do later that night. The last little bit was kind of tense. We were starting to bonk. We were running pretty low on food, and it was starting to get dark, and this hike had just been way more of an ass kicker than I had imagined it being. And we almost turned around just below the summit because we were worried about going down when we had just come up in the dark. But we decided to go for it and then did the whole descent in the dark. And this 10-mile hike that I thought was going to take us 5 hours took us 11. And I've never eaten so much food in so few miles in my entire life. That was a blast. It's always fun going on a new adventure that teaches you something you didn't know. In my case, that's that post holing is pretty hard. We had a great time and we kept all our fingers, so I'll call it a success. Although my dad did have frostnip on 2 of his fingers, but it went away. Anyway, I don't know what the next adventure is going to be, but that was a blast. It was fun to get back in the mountains, and I think that's everything I got this time. I'll talk to you next time.